Westeros has known some badass bitches, but possibly none more so than Princess Nymeria, the leader of the Rhoynar, the ethnic group that basically helped turn Dorne into a powerhouse that isn't sexist. And yeah, she comes from a group that has weird magical water magic and fought off some dragon lords. She's pretty badass. Also, there are giant turtles. But like I said, Princess Nymeria was the leader of the Rhoynar. She was a princess of the Rhoynar, but she wasn't the only one. The Rhoynar were a huge ethnic group over in Essos back when Valyria was all the rage with their dragons, and naturally that led to some skirmishes with the Valyrians, and then, you know, Nymeria and the rest of the Rhoynar having to like hightail it out of Essos. So to start off our little lesson tonight, let's do a little geography and a little history for you. So the Rhoynar were an ethnic group that came from Essos that were basically living all along the Rhoyne River, which they called Mother Rhoyne, and they believed to be like their literal like goddess. So you can see it's highlighted in yellow along the river here. So yeah, this whole thing is where the Rhoynar were. They had these basically like cities all along the rivers, like all the way down to the mouth of, I forgot the name. The text just says Mother Rhoyne has 4 mouths, so apparently there's no names. I'm sure there are, and someone will point it out in the comments, so thank you in advance. Anyway, so the Rhoynar was made up of these kind of like independent city-states, each ruled by a prince or princess of that area, which would eventually become the custom in Dorne. That's why Dorne, you know, is ruled by the prince or princess of Dorne. And the Rhoynar were a very advanced people. They had lots of advanced weaponry and craftsmanship and artisans. They were a thriving civilization in and of themselves. They were able to take care of themselves pretty thoroughly. Valyria at the time, you can see Valyria is here in the red, was very much occupied by old geese over in the orange. And they were constantly fighting with each other, as those were like the two like big empires at the time. And so the Rhoynar were kind of just like left to their own devices and were able to flourish because of that. The only thing that they had to worry about were the Andals, who still lived in Essos, kind of like northern area. The Andals would try to like, you know, invade sometimes, but they were a lot less technologically advanced, so the Rhoynar would like beat their asses constantly. Beyond their advanced weaponry, though, it's important to remember that the Rhoynar also had crazy weird water magic. Because remember, they worshipped Mother Rhoyne, the river, the source of their life, literally, but also the source of their magic. Water magic, though, something that's very interesting is there seems to have been like simultaneous development of magic in different parts of the world according to the environment that the people who were developing it were in. We've talked before about Valyria and how Valyria being in, you know, the lands of always summer or whatever, and surrounded by the 14 flames, those 14 volcanoes, got very adept at developing fire magic as a means of, you know, like harnessing the power of what was around them. In a very similar way, the Rhoynar seem to have done that, but with water. Now, considering, you know, Nymeria herself was like 1,000 years ago, and all of the tales of the water magic are like from that time and then earlier, there aren't a ton of sources, but from what we do know, the Rhoynar were known to have basically water wizards who were able to call upon the power of the river to, you know, drown cities that they were fighting, and just cause weird, like, water-related destruction. Also, possibly, because they say that, you know, like, Mother Rhoyne, the river, was their source of life, it could very well be that they were harnessing the power of the river through magic as a means of, like, their own advancement as a people. Whether that was for food or their skills and artisans or whatever, like all of their stuff that they were developing. Again, they were a lot more advanced than a lot of the people in the area, and there's a very good chance that could be attributed to the water magic. Also, something that shouldn't be skimmed over, if you will, is the similarity that the water magic that we hear about from them sounds like to the water magic of the Children of the Forest. Because remember, the Children of the Forest in Westeros, when they were fighting off the First Men and then the Andals, they harnessed water magic as a means of fighting back against them. So I think it's very interesting that there seems to be like this connection here, like the two almost like main sources of magic being water and fire, which in turn makes the others a very interesting kind of villain and archetype, because ice almost feels like a corruption of that water magic. But that's another video. Let's get back to Nymeria and the Rhoynar. Now, unfortunately for the Rhoynar, eventually Valyria was able to defeat Old Geese, the Giscari Empire, and once they did, boy did they start expanding. And the Rhoynar, being a chill people, initially were like fine with it. They're like, oh, there's new people showing up. That's okay. We can all share the river. Her bounty is, a lot. But eventually, people are encroaching a little too much. They're not being very respectful. And then skirmishes start, and then, full out wars begin. The first, if I'm remembering correctly, happened very far south, between basically, there were two cities on opposite sides of the river. One was Rhoynar and one was Valyria. The Rhoynar was Sar Mel, and the Valyrian was Volontheris. According to the legends, the skirmish began because the Valyrians captured one of the giant turtles that lives in the Rhoyne River and butchered it and killed it, and that pissed off the Rhoynar. Because they also kind of worship these turtles. They're considered like children of Mother Rhoyne, and they're giant and might be gods themselves. The turtle. This initial skirmish, the Rhoynar won because, again, they used their water magic and basically flooded Volontheris and won, and yay, but, it didn't end there, of course. Because with the Valyrians continually expanding, pushing north and stuff, more and more skirmishes happened until it really seemed like, oh, this is going to be a problem. We're going to be overtaken, we're going to be enslaved, and this is going to be bad. Now, the Valyrians were able to do this because, again, the Rhoynar were a bunch of independent city-states. When they would fight the Valyrians, all the Valyrian cities would, work together, and the Rhoynar wouldn't. This is because, remember, George bases these civilizations, these groups, on real-life counterparts. Valyria is literally his Roman Empire, which means the Rhoynar is kind of basically Greece. So Rome was able to conquer all of Greece because Greece was, little city-states, and then they would just, take one out at a time until everyone was under their control. Same thing here. But eventually, realizing that they're going to die soon if they don't do something, all the princes and princesses of the Rhoynar met and discussed what to do. And one of the princes, Prince Garin, said that they needed to, all form up an army and then just, march down and take on the Valyrians themselves. The Rhoynar were all, very hyped for this. Yes, let's go kill them all. We're going to do awesome. The only exception was Princess Nymeria. Princess Nymeria ruled a city-state called Nysar. She objected and said, hey, we're not going to beat them. We should, pack up and hightail it out of here because we're going to die. And they shouted her down, no, you're stupid. We're going to go fight. And so they gathered this army of basically, 250,000 troops, everything. It was insane. And then they began, top of the Rhoyne River and just started marching down and, slowly, destroying all the Valyrian outposts and stuff that were there and had a bunch of very, clear victories. At Sothoryos, they faced 30,000 troops and destroyed them. They moved on to Volontheris, where there were 100,000 troops, and they fought and they won, though, they got some, they had some losses themselves. And it was there that they faced 3 dragon lords with their dragons and were able to win with the help of their water wizards. 2 of the dragons were actually killed, and the 3rd one fled. It's at this point that they got kind of cocky. They decided to, keep going and push on to Volantis. And it was at Volantis the Valyri decided to really show up and, say fuck around and find out. Garin assumed there would be a few more dragons, but instead 300 dragon lords with their dragons showed up, and boy, it went about as well as you can imagine. Their water magic, which had been helpful against 3 dragons, was slightly outmatched by 300, and pretty soon all of the men were burning and dying. Of course, not before Prince Garin was captured, put in a cage, and basically forced to watch as the Valyrian army moved back up the Rhoyne, taking out all the cities that, belonged to the Rhoynar. Not before Prince Garin, when they were destroying his own city, basically called down this crazy water curse, which flooded the city and brought in this crazy, evil, fog crap that is the origin of grayscale. This curse caused grayscale all around that area, infected a lot of the Valyrians, and has become a hassle ever since. Princess Nymeria would see that the army was advancing towards her and said, okay, it's about time we get out of Dodge here. And I'm out of time, so if you want to know how Princess Nymeria escaped, please let me know in the comments. Okay, bye! Princess Nymeria had to outrun 300 hungry dragons, crazy-ass pirates that wanted to kill her, an undead city in the middle of the jungle that also wanted to kill her, before eventually making her way to Dorne, where she took one look around and went, what if I made all these men my bitches? Picking up where we left off yesterday, though, in the aftermath of the Rhoynar trying to go and fight the Valyrians off, and the Valyrians showing up with 300 dragons and basically killing all of the men of the Rhoynar, Nymeria was in danger. She'd heard that Prince Garren, the leader of the Rhoynar alliance, had been killed, and that Volantis and the Dragon Lords would likely be coming up to Nysar, which was her principality. But Nymeria said, hey, yeah, I'm not ready to die, so let's get the hell out of Dodge here, okay? She had all of the women and children that were left, because that's what basically was left in Nysar at the time. All the men had gone down to fight and were now, dead. So all of the women, the children, and the old people loaded up onto any craft that floated. Anything that was vaguely ship-ish, she loaded them up with people, and they took off. Which, of course, is the route of Nymeria and her 10,000 ships. They're unclear if it was actually 10,000 ships. It probably wasn't, but 10,000 ships just has like a nice ring to it. Also, fun fact, we're about to get like a TV show version of that, possibly. It's in development. And so Nymeria and her 10,000 ragtag ships started floating down the Rhoyne, being very careful to avoid Volantis and the dragons, which were, coming up from the south. So she was able to trick them by taking like an older channel that was less traveled, and was able to circumnavigate basically the dragons and get all of her ships out into the open ocean before they realized what was up. Unfortunately for Nymeria, once they were out in open oceans, storms started happening, and a lot of these ships were not storm-proof because, they were barely waterproof, and so people started dropping off very sadly, and so Nymeria needed to, get the hell out of Dodge, but also, find somewhere to land. What do you know? The easiest place that, most people wouldn't go to was Sothoryos. So she said, okay, well, let's try Sothoryos. Never try Sothoryos. It's just a bad idea. Look, no. At first, Nymeria would try to refuel and see if the Basilisk Isles were like habitable, which they were, but unfortunately they were also infested with pirates who, wanted to do the pirate stuff. Now, the pirates weren't above reason, so they offered to let her and the Rhoynar settle in the Isle of Toads right here, in exchange for 30 virgins and pretty boys being sent to them every year, to which Nymeria said, yeah, I'm good, thank you. So instead, Nymeria said, okay, well, let's try mainland Sothoryos, because obviously we're desperate. So she basically split up her people. She had one group up in Zamatar here, which was an old Giscari outpost, which had, been abandoned for like 1,000 years because it's Sothoryos. And then there was also Yin, the ancient abandoned city deep in the jungle of Sothoryos, so it's safe, yeah. Needless to say, within like a year or two, things weren't good. There's disease, everyone is like hot and uncomfortable because it's humid, and this is basically the equator, yeah, they weren't doing well. And then finally, the last straw came when Nymeria sent a boat down to communicate with Yin, like the abandoned city in the middle of the jungle, and found that everyone that she had sent to live there, man, woman, and child, had disappeared overnight. No trace of them to be found. So yeah, she's like, okay, yeah, let's get back on the boats. We're not doing this anymore. Though not pictured next, she would go to Noth. Noth is where Missandei in the main series is from, and is a beautiful place where the people were actually very welcoming to the Rhoynar. Unfortunately, there seems to be a god or something that protects Noth, because there is like this weird butterfly disease that happens to like the people who show up if you're not from there, and you get it and you start dying, and quickly the Rhoynar all started dying from this weird butterfly disease. So despite the people being nice, they're like, yeah, we're just gonna leave because we're dying. Next, Nymeria tried the Summer Isles, because like, why the hell not? They tried landing on what became known as the Isle of Women. Unfortunately, you can't farm there because it's all pebbles, and the rest of the Summer Isles are like, who the fuck are you guys? Please get out of here. We don't like you. Nymeria's like, yeah, fair, I get it. And like, we'll leave. It's okay. Unfortunately, as they were going to leave, a splinter cell kind of broke off from them. There was this like weird like prophetess. I think her name was like Druselka, and basically she said that Mother Rhoyne was calling back to the people and it was safe now. So like a group broke off with her, went back to the Rhoyne, and were quickly enslaved, unfortunately. So really, Nymeria and her 10,000 ships have been dwindling for years at this point. It's at this point that Nymeria is like, okay, fine, let's try Westeros. Before we go to Westeros, though, please remember, if things were to come to an end, like, there are other options. Hey, and if like a podcast where you wanted to read the book with someone, and that person, like, was maybe me, like, maybe it's going to exist there very soon. Who knows? Hey! And so Nymeria made her way up to Dorne. Unfortunately, though, because nothing can go well on this damn journey, she did run into some storms along the way. Some of her people would unfortunately get shipwrecked in the Stepstones, which is like the island chain, like right off the edge of the Arm of Dorne there. And apparently, descendants of those shipwrecked people do exist there to this day. So, like, cool, good for you. But Nymeria would eventually land in Dorne, like at the site where Sunspear is right here. And it is there that she would very quickly meet Mors Martell over here. Now, what you need to know about Mors Martell is that he was a very ambitious human being. The Martells had never been a very important group or family in Dorne. Dorne itself, because it was so arid and a desert, there wasn't any, like, dominant, or like, I should say, like, super, super dominant family. There were a bunch of, like, little petty kings that were always, like, fighting with each other over, like, the scraps, the water, the wells, whatever. But the Martells were not one of them. They did not claim to be kings. They tended to bend the knee, I think, to the Jordanes. But when the Rhoynar arrived, Mors seems to have, like, seen an opportunity here. Because remember, the Rhoynar didn't have the same, like, sexist attitudes towards women, so a lot of the women had been, trained as soldiers, and beyond that, they've been traveling for years dealing with hardship after hardship, so these are, like, hardened and, like, battle-ready women who have been through it. Also, a lot of the boys who had started off as boys were now a lot older and were, grown enough to be warriors in their own right. And so the Martells pursued the Rhoynar and Nymeria accepted and decided to, like, basically join their groups together. Nymeria and Mors would get married, and then a lot of the women of the Rhoynar who arrived married Martell and, Andal men from Dorne. I think they're Andals. Don't quote me on that. And so the Martell, like, dominion basically expanded, like, tenfold, which gave them the strength to actually challenge some of the other kings that were around here. So after years in the wilderness, Nymeria burned what remained of her 10,000 ships, said, "We aren't leaving, we are about to make Dorne our home forever." And so she ended up crowning Mors Martell over here as the first prince of Dorne, and calling Dorne, like, its own principality in the same style of the Rhoynar. Because remember, Dorne is not a kingdom like the rest of the kingdoms of Westeros. It is a principality specifically because it is in the Rhoynish fashion. And so together, these two basically launched their own, like, mini conquest of Dorne, where they systematically over the next, I think it was like a decade or two, basically took out all the other, like, kings and unified Dorne under their rule. Unfortunately, along the way, Mors would die when confronting, I think it was the Ironwoods. The Ironwoods were, like, the big family in Dorne at the time. They were, like, the kings of Ironwood or whatever. But Mors sadly, died in the middle of that fight. But Nymeria then basically fully took command of Dorne and the armies, and under her command was able to fully defeat the Ironwoods. And so when all was said and done, it said that Nymeria sent 6 petty kings up to the wall in chains to join the Night's Watch. Going from being a king to the Night's Watch, like, oof. And so from this moment on, as I said earlier, Nymeria was now the Princess of Dorne. She was unchallenged, being in charge of the principality in her own right, because of, like, the way that Rhoynar culture had basically married itself to the rest of, like, the Martells and Dornish culture in general. When you outnumber them by that much, like, you're kind of in charge, I guess. So despite the fact that Nymeria would go on to remarry a couple of times and even have a son by, I believe it was Davos of House Dane. Yes, those Danes. But even though that was her only son and her one child with Mors Martell was her daughter, when she died, she was succeeded by her daughter, by Mors Martell, who became the next Princess of Dorne. And this established the, absolute primogeniture that Dorne favors. Absolute primogeniture means just, like, the oldest child is the next one up. It does not matter the sex. So Dorne is cool and not sexist because of this awesome lady right here. Let's all give her a round of applause and thank God that she doesn't have to live in Sothoryos anymore. Okay, goodbye.